He saved my baby! Oh my god! 3, 2, 1.
Alright, what do we got?
We got a CS1, 30,000 shots, triggers unresponsive.
Damn it. Needle nose. Wrench. Small adjustable wrench. Clamp. Hex wrenches. Grease. Let's go, boys.
Sir, we're losing pressure.
Oh God, the eyes are unresponsive. What is this?
Battery?
Sunbeam?
Sunbeam's great, dude.
You're a monster.
Why did you disrespect my Sunbeam?
Never seen so much broken paint.
Get yourself together, man!
You, out of my operating room.
Yes, sir.
Sir? Yeah? I think she's gonna make it.
Really? Oh my god!
I think we saved her.
Oh my god!
Okay, we're going to talk about how to take care of your paintball gun so you don't end up like that guy. I'm going to talk to you about what kind of tools and equipment you need to take care of your gun, how often you need to take care of it, and particular details depending on whether you own a mechanical, an electromechanical, or an electropneumatic. Here we go. All right, so what tools do you need to take care of your paintball gun? We'll start with hex wrenches, commonly called Allen wrenches. These are actually hex wrenches. If you can, try to buy a set with little ball ends. This makes it a lot easier to get in at weird angles, especially grip frame screws. Don't ever loan these out to your friends. They will never come back. So you'll probably just need one set. If you're unlucky enough, maybe you'll need a metric set to go with it, only if you're a communist. Dental pick. Dental pick lets you get out those many O-rings that are scattered throughout your paintball gun. Get one of them. Old toothbrush, not to be confused with your current toothbrush. Wonderful cleaning device. Next, one of my favorites. Get a spray bottle filled with rubbing alcohol. Rubbing alcohol is a fantastic cleaner for paintball guns. It helps dissolve paint very quickly. Unlike water, it's not going to damage any electronics. It's going to evaporate on its own, so you don't have to get every last droplet out. Fantastic. So get that. Squeegee. You're going to own one of these anyways to carry on the field, you know, to clean a breakout in the middle of the game, so you might as well use it at home to help clean your barrel. Q-tips. You'll use these all the time. They're great for getting into nooks and crannies and cleaning out all the little spaces. And finally, of course, paper towels. Use paper towels nonstop, including for your goggles, so get a couple extra rolls of these. That's pretty much it, what you'll need to take care of your paintball gun. All right, let's talk about paint breakage. This is hands down the thing that you're going to be doing the most as far as taking care of your paintball gun. It's paint breakage. Paintballs have to be fragile enough that when they hit a relatively soft target, like the human body is relatively soft compared to the rest of the world, that they're going to break. Then we stuff them inside of a paintball gun. We accelerate them to about 200 miles an hour in a split second. Some of them are just not going to make it. So paint breakage is an unsolvable problem you're always going to have, so you need to know how to take care of it. All right, so there's three places that you're going to find paint breakage commonly. One is the hopper, probably the least common. Two is the breech area, and three is the barrel itself. Obviously, the barrel is the place where you're going to find most broken paint. There's ways to help reduce how much paint you break in your barrel through using things like barrel kits or just decent quality paint. But barrel breaks pretty straightforward. You can use a squeegee in the middle of the game to clean it out. This is not quite the same as getting it super, super clean before you put it away, but it's enough to get you back on the field. So at home, that's when you're going to go ahead and take the barrel off, clean it thoroughly. It's aluminum or maybe stainless steel if you're lucky. You can clean it with water if you want. Just make sure it's off the gun when you clean it with water. Next, we'll say the hopper. If you're lucky, your hopper is quick and easy to disassemble and take the shell apart. Paper towels, really all you need. Maybe rubbing alcohol if you really want to clean it extra well. So there's that. Breech is probably the most annoying of the places to clean. Depending on the gun, maybe you're lucky enough you have a very quick to remove bolt kit that lets you get and clean into this area, and maybe you have eye plates that you can remove, help get you into that area and clean it. But definitely need to clean that area. You have too much broken paint in there in the breech area, and the gun simply will not cycle. So always clean out your breech brakes. Okay. As an aside, if you want to see some amazing footage of what occurs when a paintball breaks, I highly recommend Planet Eclipse. It's probably a decade old. Made a video using slow-mo photography and a paintball gun cut in half. It's amazing stuff. I'll make sure that there's a link maybe here or there. I actually don't know how editing works, but we're going to put the link so that you can watch it. It's amazing stuff. So let's get into some specifics. Let's start by talking about mechanical guns. Mechanical guns being commonly guns like Tippmann, Spiders. Tippmann's being known as inline blowback guns, while Spider type guns are known as stacked blowback because there's two tubes. So hands down, the reason these stop working more than any other reason is lack of maintenance. They're simply not clean enough and not lubricated well enough to keep functioning. Every time you pull the trigger, there's only a certain amount of air, and think of air as energy, being released to recock the gun for you. And if the friction of the system goes up because it's full of broken paint or it's not lubricated, then the gun doesn't want to cycle. So hands down, most of the time when someone brings us a mechanical paintball gun to fix, it's because it's just not well taken care of. Now, inline blowbacks, like Tippmann type guns, have a reputation for durability. People often call them the AK-47s of paintball guns. It's kind of true. Unfortunately, even the AK-47 paintball guns can't be neglected forever. You do have to take it apart and clean it occasionally. They are a little bit more complicated to take apart because you literally have to split the body in half, but it's worth doing it. Maybe you can get away with it not quite as often, but you still have to do it. We do see these paintball guns surface after sitting in storage for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and we can get them back up and running by just doing a little bit of cleaning and lubrication. Spider type guns, stacked blowbacks, they don't do as well sitting in storage, especially dirty, sitting in storage for extended periods of time. Sometimes these guns come to us for repair, and there's so much work to clean them out, it's just simply not worth it. It would take an amazing amount of time and money and energy to get one of these back up and running. So I really recommend don't put these away dirty. I don't recommend putting any of these away dirty because you don't know when the next time you're going to pick it up. You think you're going to play next weekend, but maybe it's not till next month or next year even, or a decade from now. So by putting them away clean, they're much more likely to be working when you suddenly decide that you want to play paintball this weekend. All right, let's talk about leaks. So let's say your mechanical gun has a leak. You just picked it up. Common reasons it leaks and common ways to fix it. We'll start with number one. The actual most common reason that you find a leak on a mechanical paintball gun is not the gun itself. It's the O-ring on your tank. This is the O-ring that seals your tank to the ASA of the gun, and they do have a limited lifespan. They do wear out occasionally. Fortunately, they're very cheap, very easy to replace. So if you ever screw in your bottle, you get leaking down near the ASA, check the O-ring. It's probably time to replace it. That's a simple one. So, next reason that these guns tend to leak is the valves. They're actually fairly simple as far as where the air goes in a gun, so it's not real complicated to find out where the leak is. It's generally going to be leaking down the barrel. That's the most common place you're going to find a leak, and it's going to be because of the valve. So on stacked blowback type guns, Spiders, Azadins, HK Sabres, you're going to have a valve that looks kind of like this. It's a two-piece. You've got an exhaust valve with a soft seal on it, and then you'll have the valve itself with a raised hard edge, and they form a seal. The air sits in the back here. So usually when these are leaking, It can be because of the seal, and there's different ones, they look different, but this is just an example, is common. The other really, really common reason that we see these leak is that the O-rings on the body itself just dry rot sitting in storage. The good news is that most of these valve bodies, again, just use that simple CO2 tank O-ring, which costs $1 or less. So getting at these, taking them apart, is not terrifically complicated. You, with an owner's manual and a little bit of time, you can do it yourself. Tipmans. Inline blowbacks. Tipmans are not the only ones, but they're the common example. Depending on the inline blowback you have, depending on which tipman you have, these can be a bit more work to get into and take apart. Some of them involve little C-clips that can be really difficult to take off to let you get the guts of it out. And even when you do, you have to have the right parts to fix it. So it's a little bit harder to fix the tipman valves when they leak. They don't tend to leak as often, and they don't tend to leak as much from sitting and just storage. Stack blowbacks tend to leak more from sitting in storage. I don't know why. The O-rings on these are more common to dry rot away than they are in inline blowbacks, but they seem to. So that's your most common reasons for leak. Relax. It's probably the O-ring on your tank, but if it's not, find your owner's manual online or go to a shop. Ask for some help. Okay, next most common problem that people have with mechanical guns is they're either experiencing a lot of jamming, where the bolt seems to move forward and get stuck and they have to constantly recock it and shoot it again, or they see multiple paintballs coming out with each trigger pull. Both of those commonly will be caused by a bad ball detent. So what is a ball detent? And this is a tipman style ball detent. A ball detent is essentially a little rubber finger that sticks up into the breech. A paintball drops down from the hopper and bumps up against the ball detent. And it sits there at a rest. When you fire the gun, the paintball is moved forward, and the ball detent just simply folds down out of the way. The gun is fired, the paintball exits, the little rubber finger pops back up, another paintball drops in and bumps up against it. Well, if this little finger is broken off or worn away, or oftentimes from sitting at rest, they just get compressed and they won't spring up anymore, then you're going to get multiple balls trying to feed in at once. The spider ball detent looks a little bit different. It's more of a single finger sticking like that. The spider type ball detents nowadays you tend to find under a plate. Again, I use the word spider. It could be a HK Saber, could be an Azadin gun, but those are the most common ones. Tipmans, as always, a little bit harder to get at. You really do end up having to split the body in half and access everything to change the ball detent. So that's kind of a downside. Tipman style ball detents, the one thing you do want to be careful about is that you don't put it in backwards. If you put it in backwards so that the finger is pointing back in the gun, like that, what's going to happen is the bolt's going to come forward and get stuck on it. So every once in a while we see a customer with a gun that just doesn't want to function because they put the ball detent in backwards. You can't really do that with a spider gun, so that's not a concern. Okay. Okay. Let's move up the ladder of complexity just a little bit. We're going to talk about electromechanicals. Electromechanicals are still basically mechanical guns, but they have an electronic triggering system instead of the mechanical triggering system. As a category, we're seeing less and less electromechanicals than we used to, probably because electropneumatics have gotten cheaper. But if you have one, there's no reason to get rid of it. They're still really good guns. So the two things that you're going to see, in addition to the stuff we already talked about mechanicals, with electromechanicals, is battery and possibly capacitor. All right. Pretty much all the electromechanicals I've seen just use good old-fashioned 9-volt batteries. This is the most common reason that your electromechanical is going to, the triggering system is going to stop working. And you're going to notice that you have to pull the trigger multiple times to get it to shoot once. That's because the battery's getting low, typically. So try not to use really cheap batteries. Try to stick to Energizer, Duracell, good name brand batteries. That will save you a lot. If you want to get fancy to save yourself some money in the long term, you can get yourself a multimeter, and it lets you check just how much is left in your battery. On a 9-volt battery, most of them actually start at 9.4 volts when you first take them out of the package. By the time they're down to about 8.5 volts, let's say, you're getting onto territory where it's going to start not wanting to work for you anymore. So check that occasionally. I would say you're going to get about 2, maybe 3 weekends of play before you have to change the battery, as a rule of thumb. The other thing is capacitor. So on electromechanicals and a lot of electronic devices, they have something called a capacitor. It will generally look like a round, black, shrink-wrapped object soldered to your board. So what is a capacitor? A capacitor is essentially a device that's really good at storing electrons, and more importantly, it's good at discharging them very, very quickly. So the amount of energy that a decocking solenoid needs, which is essentially an electromagnet, to fire off is a lot more than a 9-volt can just deliver at a normal pace. So a capacitor fills up with electrons, and then when you pull the trigger, it can really energize that decocking solenoid very, very quickly. So these do give out over time. Generally what goes wrong is they corrode from the inside, and usually I know that there's a bad capacitor because it looks like it's getting puffy. It seems to puff up, and especially the ends start to round off. That tells me it's corroding from the inside. So occasionally those go bad. A good tech can get a new one soldered on for you instead of having to throw away the board and replace the board. Okay? So, but 9-volt batteries, most of the time replace your battery, you're back up and running. Okay, next category. Let's talk about pump guns. To be fair, pump guns are a pretty exotic, small category of paintball guns. There's not a lot of people using them. The people that are using them are probably very experienced players too, and probably don't need a lot of help on how to take care of their pump gun. So, one of the great things about pump guns is you are doing the work of cocking the mechanism and getting it ready for the next shot. So, unlike a mechanical, even if there's extra friction in the system because you didn't do a perfect job of cleaning and lubricating it, it's fine. It just means you're going to have to work a little bit harder to pump the gun. So really that part of maintenance is lessened, the importance of it. You still should keep it clean. So mostly what you're going to deal with if you have a pump gun is probably a leak. Commonly it'll be a leak from, like, say, a hose leading from a bottom line ASA up into the gun. In this case, it's got a 12-gram quick changer. Maybe you have a seal that's leaking there. Probably the most common leak, though, will actually be a leak down the barrel from the valve. And you'll have a valve similar to like a spider valve we looked at earlier. You'll have a cup seal, you'll have a raised metal ridge, and the cup seal seals against it. Even that, these valves last a long, long time. Most owners will probably never fix it. Most owners will probably never fix anything on their pump gun, to be really honest. So, all right, next category is electropneumatics, representing kind of the high end of paintball guns. There is a ton of very model-specific things that can go wrong with any paintball gun. You kind of need to be in the know that, oh, that particular paintball gun has this common issue, or that gun does a different thing. So that's a little bit of just getting to know your paintball gun, asking for advice from techs and whatnot. But a lot of the stuff we already talked about applies. Keep it clean, keep it lubed, you should be fine. Okay, issue number 1. Batteries. What else did you expect? So 9-volt batteries, they don't last forever. Get good ones, Duracell, Energizers. Expect to change them about every 2 or 3 times you play. That's it. Okay, next electropneumatic issue is the vision eye system. So all modern electropneumatics will have a emitter and a receiver inside the breech. It monitors where the paintball is, and it makes sure the paintball sits correctly before it allows the gun to fire. Super helpful to reduce paint breakage. So there's different kinds, but most of them will look something like this. It'll be a set of eye wires going up to either side of the gun, and there's literally looking at each other inside of the breech. Most modern paintball guns, the eye wires can be accessed under a plate on either side of the body. So typically you clean those out after you have a bad day of paint breakage. If you don't clean those out, either the gun doesn't want to fire, or worse, it will always fire because it always thinks there's a paintball in the breech because the eyes are covered by paint and it doesn't know any better. So make sure you clean those out before the next time you play. Okay, next super common problem that people come in and complaining about, and that is it's not firing fast enough. And when I say fast enough, I don't mean velocity. I'm talking about rate of fire. They just don't feel they can get the rate of fire, and they want to know what's wrong with their gun. Most of the time, nothing's wrong with their gun. It's actually the batteries in their hopper. So because modern paintball guns have that vision system, it will slow itself down to match the paint coming in, how fast the paint's coming in. And if the hopper slows down, then the gun is going to slow down. So most of the time when your gun isn't getting the rate of fire that you think it should, you're pulling the trigger really fast, it's because it's time to change your batteries inside of your motorized hopper. Okay, next maintenance item is probably the regulator. Depending on your particular electropneumatic gun, sometimes the regulator is located up here in the foregrip. That's pretty common. Nowadays, it's also becoming more common to find it underneath the main grip. Okay. In either case, there's a piston in almost any kind of regulator and that piston needs to move back and forth every time you pull the trigger. So if you're getting drop-off, velocity drop-off, meaning you're pulling the trigger, the first shot's nice and a high velocity, but it seems to drop off, and you need to let go of the trigger for a second for the system to recharge and get ready, it's probably time to lubricate the piston. This is definitely one of the cases where I would go find your owner's manual online. It's really easy to find, and double check how to take apart your gun, pull that piston out, and lubricate it with the proper grease. Put it back together. Okay? Next problem, not so common, is that you're struggling to get velocity out of your gun. You've tried everything. You don't know what's going on. It could be, and this is probably when you need a tech to assess it, but it could be your solenoid. In a modern electro-pneumatic paintball gun, your solenoid is essentially an electromagnet attached to a valve of some kind. And over time, that electromagnet can weaken, or the valve itself can get fouled up with broken paint, dirt, dirty air. Depending on the solenoid, some solenoids are sealed units. Once they go bad, there's no taking them apart, especially the electromagnetic part, which is what this is. Some solenoids, especially the newer ones that are coming to market these days, you can actually take apart, clean, and put them back together. The spool side, not the electromagnet side. This is a little bit more advanced stuff. You may not ever do it in the lifetime of owning a gun, but you might. So grab your owner's manual, roll up your sleeves. It's not that hard if you can take it apart. Next subject I want to talk about is how to deal with wires. Mostly what I'm trying to tell you is how not to deal with wires. A common way to break wires inside of a paintball gun is to grab and yank. What you'd like to do actually is find the small connector, use a fingernail, and disconnect the connector from the board. Never grab and just yank by the wires. That's a good way to rip the wires out of their connectors, and generally you have to replace the entire item. Generally you can't fix that. Another thing to discuss with wires, and that is to avoid crushing them when you're putting your paintball gun back together. Commonly eye wires or even solenoid wires. It's not that difficult to crush them, usually between the trigger frame and the body, when you go to put it back together. So take an extra second, make sure the wires are tucked away in some kind of channel or groove that they're supposed to sit in, and that you don't accidentally crush them. Most of the time when you crush them, they actually aren't destroyed, but eventually they will be. So be careful when you're putting your frame back on your gun. Next subject. Quite often, a player will come to us with a gun and they say, it just won't fire anymore. I keep pulling the trigger and it just won't fire. I've done everything and it just simply won't fire and I can't figure it out. One of the things we'll ask them is, have you made any adjustments to the trigger pull lately? The reason why we ask this. In the length of a trigger pull, somewhere in there's a micro switch that gets tripped and it activates and fires the gun. Most modern guns, you can also adjust the pre-travel and the post-travel, meaning where the trigger can move. And it is not uncommon for someone at home trying to adjust their trigger pull, which is fine, you're allowed to do that. But they adjust it so much that it can't even reach the micro switch anymore, the point in the trigger pull where it activates the micro switch. And so the gun can't be fired because you can't even pull the trigger in a manner that would activate the micro switch. So if you're making adjustments to your trigger, which is fine, it's fine to personalize it, just make sure that you don't adjust it in a manner that it can't trip that micro switch anymore. Next area to talk about is regulators. You've got LPRs and you've got HPRs. HPRs, your high pressure regulator. All the modern electro-pneumatic guns have that, of course, and that's how you're going to adjust your velocity. Sometimes it's in the foregrip up here, sometimes it's in the main grip, but either way, it's usually an Allen wrench. You adjust your velocity through that. If you adjust it too low, some of the seals inside the gun can actually struggle to seal up. They actually need air pressure to seal up, and you can get strange leaks. This often happens when you take the reg apart to clean and lube it, and you put it back together, and you have it so far out of adjustment that there's not much pressure going inside the gun. Okay, LPRs, your low pressure regulator. A lot of modern guns don't have this anymore, but an LPR is a regulator dedicated to just setting air pressure to moving the parts of the gun around. It's not the air pressure that's going to go down the barrel and shoot the ball. It's just an LPR sends air to move the components around. And again, not all guns have this anymore. Your LPR, again, usually could be adjusted via an Allen wrench, a hex wrench. However, I don't really highly recommend you mess with these too much. I'd pretty much use the factory setting on the LPR and leave it alone. I mean, over the years, I've tried different settings. I don't think there's an appreciable difference. Mostly what you're going to do is make your gun less reliable if you monkey around the LPR too much. So I'd pretty much go with the factory setting on it and leave it alone. Next common issue is dwell. So if you have an electro-pneumatic gun, you've got a chipboard inside of it that's controlling how long your solenoid is told to open and cycle the gun before it reverses course and shuts down and pulls the valve backwards and pulls all the guts back to a resting position. And how long does it do that? Well, that's something called dwell. Again, this is probably an area that I'd recommend stick with the factory, do what they do. But your dwell is found inside your chipboard. There's many different ways to access the programming in your gun, but your dwell too high, you're just wasting air. And if you turn your dwell too low, then the gun struggles to cycle. Again, I would probably just leave the dwell at factory setting and not monkey around with it too much. Next category is rate of fire. Rate of fire is adjustable often through your chipboard. You can get different modes of fire, and you can cap the maximum rate of fire through adjusting the programming in your chipboard. You're going to need to do this depending on what tournament league you play in, or even what local field require for you to be allowed to play there. So that's again going to be done through programming of your board. Your rate of fire will be a capped rate of fire. Nowadays it's typically at 10.5 balls per second. And then your mode of fire, again, is dependent on your league or your field. Semi-auto or ramp. Ramp is becoming more and more allowable at pretty much all the fields across the U.S. So that's accessible through programming. Make sure you get your owner's manual, have it in front of you before you start monkeying around with those things. Now let's talk about lubricants. If you own a mechanical paintball gun, or a electromechanical paintball gun, or some pop-it electro-pneumatic guns like Egos, Intimidators, and the like, you're probably going to be using oil on most of the components in the gun. So for oil, you have a few options. Traditionally, you walk into a paintball store and find little bottles of oil like this. They'll be a couple bucks. They should last you quite some time. My suspicion is that really that stuff is not much more than air tool oil, because essentially what a paintball gun is an air tool. So you can find air tool oil pretty much anywhere, any hardware store, Walmart type facility. If you want to spend a little bit more and probably get something a little bit better, you could get the Eclipse oil, which is silicone impregnated, which is supposed to stick around on your parts a little bit longer. Even for those guns that are, like I mentioned, mechanical, electromechanical, or electro-pneumatic, if they have a regulator, you're probably greasing the regulator, but the rest of the components you're going to oil. Okay, now that we talked about the oils that you should be using on your paintball gun, let's talk about the oils you should not be using on your paintball gun. It's a very common mistake, especially for newer players. They reach for the oils they have laying around the house. So do not grab things like WD-40 or any kind of generic household 3-in-1 oil, PB blaster, stuff like that. It sounds great. It doesn't work. It's not really intended for a paintball gun. In a similar vein, don't use real firearm oil. All those oils are not meant for what are essentially air tools, and a lot of them have very high rates, percentages of solvents, and solvents can actually attack O-rings and seals. So it's not uncommon in our industry to find an old, say, Spider that someone liberally doused down with WD-40 and they put it away for a long time, and we find the seals are just destroyed. So avoid household oils that you find laying around. Make sure you're getting either made for paintball gun oil or light air tool oil will also work. Now, if you have an electro-pneumatic paintball gun, you should be getting the grease that's made for your gun. Let's say that you have one of the legacy markers from Smart Parts, which you commonly now see as GOG or even Lux. You have things like Sleek, which used to be named under Smart Parts. If you have a MacDev, you have MacDev grease. If you have a Planet Eclipse gun, you have your own Planet Eclipse grease. If you have a dye gun, they have their own grease. You have alternatives, like say Exalt and their Vitamin G, or Hater Sauce, Marmalade, etc. What's important, what's very important, is that you get the exact right grease that matches your particular gun. No, I don't think it really matters. I'm just kidding. You should probably get the grease that's made for your paintball gun, and matter of fact, most of the guns will come with a grease already in the box for your particular gun. But is it make or break? Not really. Just make sure you're getting something made for paintball. Ideally you'd get the grease that's made for your gun, but if you're in a pinch and you got to grab some other grease, it's fine. Your gun's not going to self-destruct. It's not going to be destroyed. What's far more important is that you're taking care of the gun, that you're cleaning it and lubricating it. Even if it's not the grease that the manufacturer distributes, it's better than not doing it all. Okay, so I'm not going to pretend that what we've just gone through is a utter comprehensive description of how to take care of a paintball gun and how to keep it up and running. However, I think we're trying to just give you the basics of how to make sure your gun has the least amount of problems possible. So if there's any closing thoughts I could give you, the big overarching theme is clean your gun and lubricate it. If you do that, you're going to avoid most problems. And if you happen to have an electronically based gun, change your battery on a regular basis. If you do those two things, you're going to avoid most problems. The other piece of advice I give you is to get comfortable with the owner's manual. You can find it online. If it didn't come in the box with your gun, a lot of manufacturers aren't even bothering to put it in the box because most people don't read them. But you can definitely find it online. So do those things. You'll have a lot more success. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us here, tech@agpaintball.com. Even if you're not one of our customers, we're happy to help you. Just send us questions. We'll do what we can. We'd like to see you stay and play in the sport for as long as possible. So thank you.